Let's start with less severe punishments and gradually move to the real nightmares. 7. Impalement. Impalement was used in many countries, but it's most known for its use in Europe in the 17th century. Usually bandits, robbers, and rebels were punished this way. The punishment began with the criminal being laid on their stomach and their hands tied behind their back. Then, a smooth wooden stake was taken and greased with oil to ease penetration. This stake was inserted directly into the victim's anus and hammered in. They had to modify this method because, initially, many victims enjoyed it. Just kidding. I'm not sure if anyone liked it, but I'm sure there was at least one person who might have found it interesting. The stake was driven into the body until it emerged through the shoulder, head, or mouth of the criminal. Then, they were left on display by a busy road. In some cases, the criminal was impaled shallowly so that they wouldn't die immediately, and they were left to suffer in plain sight of passers-by. 6. Keelhauling. This brutal punishment was used at sea on sailors who stole or were violent, and it usually resulted in death. Keelhauling started with the sailor being tied to a rope that went around the circumference of the ship, and then thrown overboard. A group of men on the ship slowly pulled the rope to drag the sailor around the ship, including the keel, hence the name of the punishment. At first glance, it sounds harmless. You swallow some water, get bruised from the rope, and come out scared but unharmed, right? Unfortunately, no. Often, the sailor didn't have to worry about surviving because they died before reaching the keel. Sailors drowned, broke their backs and necks on the keel, but there was an even scarier detail. The entire underside of the ship was covered in barnacles. Their sharp shells were the main obstacle to a less painful death. The poor souls were torn apart by the sharp barnacles that pierced their bodies and cut their flesh. Sometimes victims clung so tightly to the shells that they literally got stuck under the ship and were eaten by fish. If by some miracle a sailor survived, he faced one of two fates. He was sent around again, or he died from infection. 5. Bamboo torture. Just hearing the name, where did your thoughts go? Probably that people were beaten with bamboo sticks or pierced with bamboo stakes. No. Bamboo torture involved tying the victim down and letting bamboo shoots grow through their body, as bamboo grows very quickly. Initially, the victim was tied down and placed over a bamboo plant while it was still in the ground. Just before it sprouted, and the plant started growing upwards through the victim's anus and body. Surprisingly, according to eyewitnesses, some victims initially enjoyed it and burst into laughter. Of course, I'm joking. No one could have liked that. I hope. The most common practice was to secure the victim over several bamboo plants, still in the ground, just before they sprouted, positioned so that they pierced vital organs like the heart and lungs. Bamboo grows very quickly and can grow up to 3 feet in 24 hours, meaning many victims of this torture died within a day. I think the worst part of this torture is that you can feel the bamboo slowly moving through your body, slowly killing you and causing horrific pain. By the way, this is my first video, and you are almost my very first subscriber on the channel. Let's break this record. 4. Sawing. In this method, it's clear that the tormentors put their heart into making it as torturous as possible. You see, they could have started from the head, and it would have been painful, but the victim would have died relatively quickly. However, they wanted it to be more painful, so they decided to turn the victim upside down and start sawing from the bottom. The victim was turned upside down, which meant they wouldn't lose much blood because, in this orientation, all the blood rushed to the head and arms, and they would feel every cut. The saw passed through the body slowly until it reached vital organs, and then the victim died. This could take minutes, not counting the pauses that were deliberately made to prolong the process. 3. Boiling alive. Yes, you heard that right. So I hope everyone is ready for some human soup, because that's exactly what King Henry VIII did to his victims in the 16th century. The first instances of boiling can be traced back to ancient Rome under the villainous Emperor Nero. But it wasn't until 1531 that King Henry VIII really started cooking people in the kitchen, because after a palace cook was caught poisoning people, King Henry officially passed a law stating that anyone caught poisoning others would be punished by being boiled to death. This was probably because Henry had a supposed phobia of being poisoned, and I don't blame him. First, The victim is submerged in a cauldron of boiling water, and within just a few seconds of immersion, the nerves in the victim's legs and feet are completely destroyed, and the pain moves upwards until all nerve endings are damaged. After that, the victim's skin, fat, and muscles start to become soft like mashed potatoes, and their clothes actually begin to fuse with their own skin. As the fat boils, the whole body turns into a lump of cooked mass. You'd think the victim would die quickly in such conditions, right? Not quite. Due to the slow heating, death occurs only after the heat penetrates deeply inside. Organs start boiling from within, but as soon as the victim begins to really cook, the smell of their cooked body fills the air. Worse yet, the victim can smell their own body cooking. Imagine that, the smell of an appetizing meat broth, but it's you boiling. In 1, 2, Blood Eagle. This method is brutal. You have been warned. The first thing that will surprise you is that this ancient Viking execution was voluntary for the victim, and its goal was to rip the victim's ribs and lungs from their back, creating almost wing-like structures. You heard right? According to several sources, the bravest and boldest men chose this execution as a worthy death. Let's start with the fact that Norse mythology was based on worshipping warlike gods, and both pain and brutality allowed one to become a favorite of the god Odin and get a better place in the afterlife. This led men to dream of dying with honor by old standards. This execution allowed them to fulfill the need for a worthy death, as not everyone was ready to face it. It began with the victim being tied and laid on their stomach on the ground. Then, a designated Viking with a large, sharp knife or axe began cutting the victim's back with such force that it broke the ribs. The ribs were then pulled out and stretched outward like wings. The worst part was when the victim's lungs were pulled out and stretched over the ribs to create the full wing image. By the time the lungs were removed, the victim was already dead and covered in blood, and the body was usually hoisted on a pole for display. I can't even imagine how terrifying the suffering from this execution was. It's especially hard to believe that these very people were the ancestors of modern Scandinavians, the people of Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. Such big, calm, rational, and harmless people. Scaphism. In my opinion, this is the worst torture method on this list. Scaphism, or being eaten alive, has historically been used in various ways. One method involved a barrel, another, a boat. In this example, I will focus on the barrel method. The method begins with the victim being placed in a barrel and secured inside, leaving their head, hands, and feet outside. So far, it doesn't sound too bad. It seems like we're just cosplaying a scene from The Hobbit, but wait. Then the victim is force-fed large amounts of milk and honey, and their limbs are also covered in this mixture. The milk and honey attract insects, and the excessive feeding causes severe diarrhea in the victim, forcing them to defecate right in the barrel, thus attracting other parasites and rats. The victim is continuously fed but left defenseless and subjected to attacks by all the animals and insects drawn to this feast, allowing them to slowly eat the victim alive. The feces accumulate, and worms and rats start to penetrate the body, eating the limbs. In my opinion, this method is the worst of all. The most horrifying part of this method is how long it can last. Your body can survive in this state if you're continuously fed for several days, with the longest documented event lasting 17 days, during which the victim slowly lived in their own excrement and was eaten alive by insects and parasites, causing infections. This is probably the most excruciating and painful death one could imagine. I hope you understand how peaceful a time we live in. For our ancestors, all these tortures were as much fun as watching this video is for you. So if you liked it, subscribing is exactly what it will mean for YouTube. See you in the next video.